Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining another Lead Square virtual roundtable. We have been doing a couple of these for a while now. So this is the first we're doing for EdTech, but many more to come. I have a great audience and a great panelist section here today. So let's start with Anup. Hi Anup, thank you so much for joining us. And we also have Digvijay, we have Anmol, we have Gunjan, we have Deepak. So you will hear more from them. So Anup is from Akash Byju's, Digvijay is from Leverage Edu, Anmol is from QMath, Gunjan is from Hero Wired, Deepak is from uh,
Upgrade.
Upgrad. Yes.
Upgrade.
All right. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. And we have We have a question tab on the right side. So if you have questions, and we will be putting up polls as well, please put that out on the chat panel there, so the panelists can take up questions. So over to you, Nilesh. Please take over and get started with the session.
Thank you so much, Shibani, and you always do the organization of these sessions. So thank you for requesting and getting the panel here. I really appreciate Anmol, Anup, Digvijay, Deepak, and Gunjan your time for the session today. So let me dive into I think the first of course Akash say we'll start because it's a big news which happened not very long ago. And being a big brand, being in the offline world for a very, very long time. How do you, Anup, how do you sort of see the test prep business where you were one of the top firms in the country, and also I believe outside India also you have some presence. So how did your market was behaving, let's say 5 years ago? What are the trends now, and where do you see it is headed now? Now you're part of the big Baiju team. So how do you see and how do you view that the changes in the business?
Yeah, well, thank you, Nilesh. See, if I talk about test prep, practically there is a paradigm shift in teaching learning process, not only in test prep, everywhere it is happening. So here, if I see in the business as usual and the normal way, the chalk duster or the board pen concept, now it is more tech enabled. So we tech, normally we say ed tech, but in our case it is tech enabled. So it is a reverse. So why it is so? Because now we have to see from the two different perspectives, from the student parent and from the institute or the teaching or the institution. So from a student parent, it was anyway, so it was forced, but certainly it has given lots of learnings to the industry, to students, to parents, everyone, and a lot of readiness has come. If you see from the student perspective, uh, the the concept of learning, of the self-awareness, proactive learning has come on this because couple of things which were not happening, now people are more involved into it. On the other hand, couple of things are missing, maybe kind of peer group learning and maybe tech-enableness. So changes are there. A lot of changes are there which are happening. Maybe during the session we will discuss how it is impacting the education as well as how is it impacting, especially in the test prep, the performance.
So,
Because
test prep, when we talk test prep, we cannot ignore quota, which was a big deal,
yeah,
for many years, right? So, will quota ever come back in the form it was? Like,
see, I,
that's the big question. It will
yes,
not
so
happen.
Nilesh, I tell you, now in the new normal, it is going to be online, offline, and hybrid together. So it is going
Okay.
to coexist. So quota means the hub kind of concept is going to come back again. This is not only quota, every maybe regional coaching hubs or maybe educational hubs will come back. So
Okay.
there is no doubt they
But
will
but
come
they
back.
will not come back at the same strength as they were before.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, what exactly is there? See, we need to understand that the concept of quota or a coaching hub, it will last, because there is a certain segment of the student who are really willing to go, and they need that kind of teaching learning process. Now what will happen, maybe more quota type of structure will come out, and that will be evolved. Maybe all regional centers will have a quota like of a structure. So may not be a quota will be of that size, but quota concept will continue.
So, then let's say, and I'm just really making a hypothetical statement. Let's say if quota model comes back in 40% of what it was, let's say 35-40%, right? And the success rate in quota goes up in the test prep, then will it go back to 100 then? Like, you know what I mean? So because if let's say quota is producing more results, right? Then the parents would again go back there, because they will say online may, hybrid may, it is not that successful.
No, Nilesh, I tell you what I said, that quota model, in the sense, the regional hubs, quota is one of the model where pan-India students come. Similar kind of regional hubs will come. So now there will be a similar quota model from bigger institutes with a bigger capacity, with the same type of attention, because quota means it is something different was there, which was targeting a certain kind of students, that will be now decentralized. So
Got it.
decentralization of this model will certainly give some more emphasis on performance locally also.
Understood. So let me take a segue and go to Anmol. And Anmol, you're a fully online, program you offer, and I believe you started with math, but you'll be offering many more products as you go along. So how did this work for your firm? So when you started off, what was the market like, and how it has progressed? Of course, COVID has given a huge shot, but how did that pan out, and where do you see your kind of online business going from here?
Perfect, Nilesh. I think a great question. I was very excited to answer this question, precisely because it has been a big adventurous ride for Qmath. I'm sure it has been the same for everybody else, but why is it very different for Qmath? Because for the last all 6 years till 2019, we were all Qmath has been a very heavy operational offline business, where the teachers teach the kids in their houses, and there was a very little stint of an online class experience for a particular parent or a student, right? It has been an adventurous situation, because post-pandemic, shifting everything to an online business, and proudly to say that so successfully, where we have been able to shift and scale at the same time to an online business, has been a phenomenal experience for the company, for me as well. And at the same time, we before pandemic, we were specifically, had a very good base established in an Indian market, but I guess this situation has given us good leverage to make a base in the international market through an online business, because for a very simple reason that online business gives you freedom from the constraint of the finding a good expert in your area for the exact need that you want to have.
So yours is a unique business, if you ask me, in a sense that you had to really shift it completely, right? I mean, you were doing something before, and you had to really move it to a new business. While for example, in case of Upgrad and other players, it was already an online business. Like, it started as an online play, but in your case, so did your sales fall through for a time period, or you figured out that much ahead and that never happened? Like, you just kept growing, or you were steady and then and took off?
Nilesh, I would be very frank here. I would not say that we had an idea in 2019 that something like this sort would happen. But luckily, I would say, fortunately, we had developed an online platform which had, fortunately, very good response in comparison in relation to our offline model. A very good platform which we had already started off in our international market.
Okay, that was before pandemic, basically.
Before
okay, awesome.
Before even COVID hit, right? So that's why we had a very good response already coming from an American market. So we were very confident that yes, this works.
Okay.
Then as soon as March 22nd happened, and in the next 7 days, we had to shift all, like I would say, roughly 50K students in India to an online class was a big challenge. But I think I will appreciate the positive nature that everything, and the QMAT, all the business teams are always positive. I would say the sales
Yeah.
team.
So did the person who suggested that model, did he get a raise later or?
I'm not sure Manan getting a raise is making any change to the company, right? So yes,
Okay.
that happened that escalated very quickly, but it happened and everything. And by the way, if you guys have no idea, Qmath has now totally shifted the business to an online model. Right now, we are not running anything offline.
So
And
this is
I
good.
think
So let me get the full online person, which is Upgrad for now, and let's see what Deepak, because Deepak, your story is an Upgrad story is online major, right? That's the whole
Yes,
story.
yes.
And we have Anup here, of course. They're in a different segment altogether, but they continue to believe, and is a reality also, that market needs some decentralization, but people will, there'll be some category of students who will go and meet and learn. So how does what, in your view, that will continue and you will continue to grow because market as a whole is growing? Is that the view, or you see it changing completely from an Upgrad thinking standpoint?
So thanks, Nilesh. So basically, how I also look at like what Anup said, right? It's going to be coming out as a hybrid model. Some part will go completely online. Some part will continue to be an offline, where people think, okay, they need to go to the college, they need to go to the campus to do it completely as a standalone next 2 years of education or 1 year of education. Some will continue to do a hybrid model where they do some classes over like on a weekday over online models, and the weekends maybe attending in the campuses where they more of a Q&A sessions or more of a solving sessions, right? Things like this. So I also see this model will go more of an hybrid model. I mean, we also, as an Upgrad, we also started a hybrid models back in February and March 2020 last year, but then pandemic happened and then we had to stop that and we had to move completely online model. But over a period of time, I agree to what Anup said. It's going to be more of a mixture of
Mix of
online.
online and
It's
offline.
online, offline, and a hybrid model. All three of them will continue to exist together.
Okay,
Or
got it.
yeah.
Got it.
But as a segment, yes, we are already slightly more matured, wherein the focus is already because they've completed one half of their education, which is basic graduation, and then they look at okay doing their corporate lives, the working professional careers, and at the same time they can upskill themselves. So we more of becomes like a lifelong education. It's a more of an upskilling sector wherein people would continue to do it online as well because they can actually do it without losing an opportunity, and that's something which gives them which gives us an edge in this segment wherein we get the business growing and people continue to learn, evolve, and grow in their careers.
So do you see, and I'll get Gunjan you in a second, because some part maybe similar in your model at Hero Wired, which Deepak's team is executing, some part, if I may. But do you see, Deepak and Gunjan, do you see this growing like double digit for many years to come, or like what's the view here, the future, Deepak?
It will continue to grow 100%. I mean, without a doubt, it will continue to grow in double digits. Why? Because now people are getting used to learning online. They find out ways, okay, when they can actually study, they can. So the idea was there was always a thought process in mind whether I can study online or not. Now with time spent with the time that they spent online with last 1.5 years, all of us were actually able to work. All of us were actually able to study. All of us were actually able to deliver what we were supposed to deliver in offline. Supposed to do those meetings, the catch-ups, the team outings. Everything has been happening online. So when this learning is something which will help the sector also grow over a period of time.
Gunjan, love to hear your view and love to hear how you see the sector, 5 years before, now, and the future of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Nilesh. Very interesting thoughts from everyone. So see, for the upskilling space, what has happened, Nilesh, are multiple things have happened together over the last few years. One is the sudden immediate need that has come up for upskilling, which has come in the last 4 to 5 years only. Before that, primarily, we were running traditional job roles, Industry had traditional job roles. The job roles were not moving as fast as they've been moving over the last 4-5 years, purely because of the adoption of technology, right? Now, suddenly 5 years back, for example, there was this need for digital marketing professionals. Right after that, we had business analytics, which became, the need of the hour. Today, it's data science, AI, ML, which is, probably the need of the hour. 2 years later, 3 years later is going to be something very different. AR, VR technology, many different technologies are going to come, right? So I think one primary thing which has really led to the whole, increase in the upskilling market is this need for upskilling.
Okay.
Where a working professional today, almost, and most studies say that about almost 50 to 60% of the working professionals today require to upskill themselves to be relevant in the industry. So whether you're looking for a new job, or you want to be successful in a new job, or you want to change your job, you can't survive till you upskill yourself, right? So I think that is one of the largest changes which has led to this market growing over the last 5 years. The other two things which are interestingly, which happened over the last year or two. One is, of course, how COVID changed the adoption to online learning, and everyone has experienced this, everyone spoke about it as well. Which means suddenly now the requirement for upskilling and adoption to online learning is leading to people doing online upskilling programs, right? And of course, we've seen that change.
So,
And
yeah, go ahead. No, you continue the thought. I have a different thought to intervene, but please complete. Sorry.
Okay. No, you can. So the other third thing I was talking about, which has changed what the future is going to look like for upskilling edtech, is NEP. Which has also happened in the last year. According to me, what's going to happen over the next 5 years? We've not even, touched the tip of the iceberg as far as upskilling is concerned, because, there are studies which say that McKinsey has a report which says 375 million working professionals will need to upskill themselves by 2030. And today we wouldn't be even 1% of that number today, probably, right?
Okay.
So, which means the potential over the next 8 to 10 years is going to be humongous. And like you said, I totally agree, it's going to move more than double digits. 30-40% is the growth which is expected over the next 8 to 10 years. And I agree with, Deepak and Anmol that a hybrid model in terms of the format of the learning, which is the best of both worlds, right? Online has its own advantages, offline has its own advantages, and how do you kind of make the best of both and create a hybrid model is what is going to work in the future.
So that will be basically, you're saying the phygital is the way to go. It will not be fully digital, but there'll be some component. But the one question I have, and I don't know the answer, but if you see the whole upskilling landscape, right, it is largely driven by tech to some degree, right? Because these skills we talked about, the digital marketing, the analytics, and also management programs, if I may call, because management programs are also like a specialized skill, right? It is not your routine. But if you go to other industries, right, so one of the reasons why people are getting upskilled is because the landscape in these industries change fast. Meaning the marketing methods of marketing changes fast, or some new technology comes in, so you have to learn that. But that is not true for the vast majority of the market. Like a retail, for example, if you take a retail format right now, things are not changing there for decades. So why would somebody do a lot of upskilling there? Maybe the market is probably limited to this tech world only. Is that if that is true, then maybe what we are seeing as a potentially large market is not there. So is there a view on that? Yes,
Nilesh, I can take that question. So a very, very relevant question. In fact, we've been watching multiple other sectors also, while evaluating what kind of programs we want to launch. And, what we're realizing, Nilesh, is that interestingly, there is no sector today who has not been touched by technology.
Okay.
Whether you pick up, let's say, healthcare, let's pick up healthcare. How healthcare has changed over the last 2 years with health tech coming in, right? Most of the healthcare has had to move online. You pick up a logistics, simple warehousing, how it was done 5 years back to how the whole automated warehousing, robots, that entire automation has come into the picture. Right? Pick up finance, banking, financial technologies, how the entire fintech has changed the finance world, right? So I think technology has touched each of these sectors, right? And for people to kind of even coexist in their existing, traditional sectors as well, will need to understand the role of technology and understand the role, the role that some of these technologies play in their own sectors to be able to be successful.
Got it. So, for example, you're right. I think if maybe this is a very simplistic example, but let's say everybody can open an Excel, but everybody cannot use it the power it offers, right? So there will be people who will just maybe offer some programs, courses to for these, and these may not be like a large degree program. These are more bite-sized learning, as they call it, maybe something like that. But let me bring Digvijay in the conversation because he's the one people are trying to kill his model of getting people to a different education, different environment of education. So Digvijay, what's your take on this, and how you see your market, what it was, and where do you see it is headed?
Sure. So I think while the discussion is on upskilling, I believe studying abroad and education, the term in itself, is not just about learning a skill, right? It's a lot about being on a campus, understanding how to even interact with people, how to probably adjust yourself in a very different environment. Education is a lot more to it. I think literacy is just about 30% of it, right? 70% is a lot of other things that you learn when you go to a college, and that's exactly what our business is about, right? Leveling up people. So having myself, had the opportunity, while having studied in Indian schools, I had the opportunity to spend like semesters abroad in Duke University or in sunny Buffalo, and I took so much back from it. So I speak from personal experience in terms of when anybody goes to study, even in an Indian college or studying abroad, it brings a very much different perspective to their lives and a different learning than upskilling. And I think these are two separate markets altogether. So someone who's looking to upskill is a working professional who's upskilling themselves to take a hike in their job, right? Whereas someone who's going to study abroad at an undergraduate or a postgraduate level has completely different objectives and aspirations in life, right? Those people are going to study abroad either from the perspective of saying doing courses that are not available in India, right? Or they are going from the perspective of saying doing, going to universities that are very well renowned, more renowned than those in India. Or thirdly, and the largest chunk is students who are going from the perspective of actually staying in a foreign country, even if it's for 2 years, 5 years, or for their lifetime. They want to stay in a foreign country, experience that, right? That is the aspiration. So yeah, I believe it's a completely different market in terms of what its size is and how it's growing. That was the second question. So I think it's a humongous market, right? It's a market that I think it's currently only about 7%, 5 to 7%, organized. 93% is completely fragmented, and it's a market that's growing at about 37% CAGR, right? Especially when we see, China used to be the biggest supplier of, international students to universities abroad. However, over the last decade, China has seen now the growth rate sort of curbing down, whereas India is on the rise, right? And China at its peak used to be at about 40% CAGR every year, and India over the last, even in the pandemic times, saw about a 30% growth, right?
Wow.
So you can only imagine how quickly it's growing, especially with respect to students who are, one, wanting to go study abroad with a lot more global exposure that they're getting, B, in terms of rising incomes, also access to a lot of education loan capital that is cheaply available, C, also a lot of a lot of information that students are able to get in terms of the big myths that exist, right? The big myths that exist is studying abroad is very, very expensive. It costs you crores of rupees. Well, that's a myth. Reality is that if you want to go to a master's abroad, it costs you as less. I mean, it can cost you as less as even 8-10 lakh rupees an annum, right? And with scholarship options available, it becomes much cheaper. So all these three sort of coming in together, the market is exploding at this point of time.
So, which means, so of course, the big plus for this market will be because just the, I won't say for everyone, but for a large part of the middle class or the upper middle class, the incomes are rising also, right? As say, incomes are rising, which means the affordability goes up for something like something like an outside program. But how do you see this online degrees, which the government also authorized some 100 universities to offer that, right? And now, what role will that play in your view? And Deepak and Gunjan, if you all can come in, what role that will play in, because universities will also start offering upskilling
So
programs.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm going back to my previous point, right? These are two separate audiences,
Okay.
right? Someone who's looking to upskill themselves and not going to study abroad is not because he or she does not have the money, right? That student is wanting to upskill so that they can do a job that they're not able to do at the moment, right? Whereas the student who's going to study abroad has a very different objective. The objective is to go and like study in a foreign country, right? Imagine a student saying that, you know what, I'm going to be in the US or in Canada or in UK or Australia. I'm going to have my education for the next 2 years over there, probably try my luck, have a couple of years of work experience over there. And if after that I feel like I'll come back to my country, but I want to have that exposure. That is what the student is thinking. Whereas the student who's upskilling is thinking about saying, you know what, while I'm doing my job, let me upskill myself for over a 4 to 6 month long period, and then maybe look for another job that upskills myself, increases my package, right? I think so. The objectives and the personas of the two people are very different.
Very different. But there is online degrees coming in, right? That is happening. That is going to happen. What will which part of the market will that challenge?
So online degree is different from studying on campus abroad. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So online degree student will be very, very different. So I'll give you an example, right? Practical example. If you look at last year when the pandemic happened, majority of the universities asked students that, you know what, you can start online. If the borders don't open up, you may not fly in. It's fine. We will give you your degree even then. We'll also give you probably a discount, right? Very few students picked it up till the time actually borders opened up and universities came back and said, you know what, you start online. We are guaranteeing you within 2 to 3 months, borders will open and you will come in. You will get your 2 years post-study work visa. And suddenly the uptick went, like our enrollments went up, right? Because these students are not looking at online programs. If you look at Australia, it's been closed for the last 2 years. Australia has not picked up at all. Probably by mid-2022 or Jan 2023 is when it's going to open up, right? And if you look at the number of enrollments in Australia for regular programs which are being offered online today, it's not happening. And it's obvious, right? Because when these programs are being offered online, there is also this challenge of whether all time zones can be accommodated by the specific universities, right? Because students are coming from all different countries. All of those things sort of coming in, logistical challenges also coming in. Students weren't interested in doing online programs at all.
Got it. So let me get Gunjan, Deepak in for your views on how this upskilling so upskilling is of course a different market altogether as we discussed. But the online degrees, like what is going to happen to that? Like the colleges which are there, like is there a competition to the local colleges? Like what's the deal?
See, the idea with online degrees is it's a different TG, right? For example, there are people who prepare for competitive examinations like UPSC or something of that sort, right? They need a degree also at the same time, and then they want to prepare for these competitive exams as well. This is one segment where online degrees will help you a lot, because people preparing for those exams need a degree as a backup as well in the future, because we all know the success rate in these examinations, right? So that's one segment where it helps. Now there are a lot of people who, because of multiple various reasons, they were not able to complete their education because of family constraints or whatever it is, right? So that is one another TG where these online degrees can actually focus and help those people complete their basic education or first formal education while doing it online. So that's one of those markets that these online degrees are helping it. And at the same time, now people in smaller towns of the country who can't migrate because of financial reasons or XY. I mean, for example, let's say a person in Maharashtra, let's say from Akola, just as an example, he's not able to migrate to Mumbai and wanted to study from a Mumbai university, right? But his aspirations were he wants to study from a Mumbai university. Now, this is one thing that gives him an opportunity to study from Mumbai university, at the same time do what he's exactly doing at his hometown or whatever XYZ things, at the same time get the degree as well. So these are the few segments that I see online degree is going to come out well in the future.
Yeah.
And
Gunjan, please.
To add to that, Nilesh, to me there are two different pieces, and I somewhat agree with Digvijay that there is a market who wants to go abroad to study, right? And for them, this online degree may not be a replacement, but it could be a bridge to their master's. So what is really happening today, and what is probably going to happen in the future, is a model which is going to be a hybrid model where you, let's say, study 1 year online, for example. I'll give you an example. We have something which is called a MicroMasters with MIT, which basically says that you finish your MicroMasters, let's say here online in India, get some credits which you can use to do your masters, the remaining part of the masters abroad, right? So as far as the foreign universities are concerned, I agree with Digvijay that the motivation to go abroad and the motivation to go to the universities is different. But what this model helps is reducing the duration of the program and reducing the cost of the program, because you can technically do 1 year online plus maybe another 1.5 year offline, right? So I think, in my view, in the foreign university segment, this model is going to probably happen over the next, let's say, 4 to 5 years, and online degrees are already like you mentioned, they're already there in the market. What is going to happen in the Indian market is, again, like Deepak also rightly said, one is you give access to these degrees and programs to everybody across the country, which was probably not available in many cities earlier in many cities. The other thing is, today now somebody who was, let's say, did not get through a tier 1 university and was originally going to a tier 2 or 3 universities, now for them suddenly these options have opened up, because you have these hybrid degree programs running, which are from again, from very, very good universities, whether it is Indian universities or kind of foreign universities as well. So it opens up the opportunity for the people who were originally going to a tier 2, 3 university. And hence this will definitely, in my view, over the next 4 to 5 years, also with NEP coming in, where your credits have become transferable in India as well. People will use this opportunity to do these online programs, take it as a replacement to a tier 2, 3 university, which they would have gone to otherwise, and get their master's degrees and going forward, even undergraduate degrees online.
Interesting. So but I also see the point that the TG for this category is different. It is not the one which Digvijay is getting. So that's different, and the upskilling, of course, is a totally different. It's really for the professionals to go and. But somewhere or the other, looks like you all will be the markets will be overlapping for. So Digvijay may start moving into what you guys are doing, right? At some point, and maybe you all are doing it, like in certain ways.
We're already doing it.
Yeah, it's a combination of it. So you expect more competition coming in. But let me get a quick view from Anup, because I think this is the oldest segment, which all of us have gone through programs. Like each of us would have had either Akash, Fitji, Agarwal, Brilliant. Some of the other program would have gone through. So Anup, from what you see. And so many new players coming into the segment as well, right? I heard Amazon is coming and many others. But from where you see, what is the size of the market? Like how big can this be from your standpoint? Like where you are already there, you're one of the recognized brands. How big your market can be from here, like in 5 years or 10 years?
So, well, Nilesh, I tell you, with the tech enablement, if you see, the best part is the penetration. Now, if you see from the Akash perspective, we used to have a classroom center and we used to deliver the classroom experience. With the new model where we are offering hybrid, or maybe with the addition of Byju's with Akash, now we will be able to penetrate market bigger. We will be able to deliver better. So now if you see the market, it is a shift of the market. The organized market is already there, but it is a very small. And now the unorganized market will also be catered by us. So this is somewhere we see a larger potential where we can reach to the deeper part of the country. We can really serve better. And that is the size where we can think of the size we have. See, India is, if you typically see, it is a country of aspiration. We are driven by aspirations. So it's not finance, it's not nothing else. It's all about aspiration. So we have huge of aspirations inside the country, and that is there where it's up to you how you can reach, how you can deliver, how you can perform. So if you see the market size, any multiplier is eligible for us. So it's not kind 2x, 3x. You think of the size India with the kind of aspiration for education and the type of mindset we have, especially for competitive exams. Think of the market, it is there.
So are more competitive exams coming? Like, because the more exams come, the market size goes up, right? Like
See,
there are more exams there. So is that also a trend you see? Like just not because you're focused in couple of areas, but let's say overall this competitive exams will go up from here, or they'll just remain same.
See, if I talk about our segment only, now the thing is we are into primarily into engineering and medical test prep. So we have a standard exam, and see the education system in India, we have limited format of test taking. So that is where with the NEP coming in picture, maybe the credit system will give a different platform for the test prep, or maybe some test exams. But as of now, with the limited periphery, the examination, I don't see any new examination coming, because now we are standardizing and centralizing the exams. Earlier, it used to be for medical, it used to be state level exams. Now we have centralized. There is a single NEET exam for UG. So now we are consolidating the education structure, but certainly with the NEP coming in picture, maybe with the credit system coming in picture, the most important thing is multidisciplinary. So that when it will become a multidisciplinary kind of education system, perhaps we can think of more tests and more kind of things coming in.
So so with the credit system, it's an interesting point. The people will then migrate from one college to another. Is that going to become a thing which will be very common? And how will which also means that the university or the college ecosystem which is offering that program, they cannot stay easy, because then they have to retain that students for the next, like every year it's like a renewal, right? So which means that which is interesting. So how are you all thinking about it? Like, what's your plan, Gunjan, Deepak? What, like, if people can take away the credit and go to somebody else, then you have a difficult problem, right? Like we have to sell software and then retain the customer, isn't it? So no more you'll have once you sell and then have the student for 4 years. That's not going to happen, right?
Yeah. No, I think the way we look at it is for EdTech, it's an opportunity, and which basically means that whatever programs people, learners do with us, they will be able to earn credits which they can actually go and use in universities, for masters or for undergraduates going forward as well, right? And I think, Nilesh, in today's world, retaining a customer is one of the most important things. I don't think a business can be successful, whether it's a university or an edtech firm, anybody, if you're not able to retain your customer.
Absolutely.
I think it's more about the content as well as the learning experience that you also provide. So at any point in time, you have to provide that support that he or she is looking for, and make sure the content is superior to any other player in the market or any other university in the market. I think if these two things are taken care, I think retention will not be a challenge. But yes, it's a big challenge, but it needs to be handled well and handled with care.
Because now the universities will do a proactive outreach to the student, because for them the customer acquisition basket increases, right? It is not just the one who are going to get a degree program. It is the one who is already there getting a degree program somewhere else. That can be targeted and you can win that student over. That will also happen.
So one more thing that we've also done is we've created a pathway. So if you look at Upgrade's portfolio, also we offer PGP through one Indian university and articulate it to a master's from one of the foreign universities. So we've also created pathways in terms of an Indian as well as a global university, wherein the aspirations of learning from a global university is also taken care at the same time. And another pathway that we also created is with the same Indian university. You can do 1 year online and then second year go abroad, be it Australia, be it Canada, be it Germany, other places as well. So that also is another pathways that we've created.
So in your case, if they've bought into that story, then it will be difficult for them to switch, because they're already they're already into that system. But anybody who's taking a regular degree program, that student is up for renewal every year, and it will be like an insurance renewal process. It'll be fun to see how that pans out. And of course, I've got some ideas now how to sell my software there.
It'll become a subscription model. You subscribe for a year.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, but what are the what are the drop-offs in your programs now? Like, whatever you see, like, how many people actually do complete the program fully? Like, what's the completion rate for what you see, Gunjan, in your business, Deepak, Anmol? You have a different program, but I'd love to hear your views, and Anup. What do you see?
So interestingly, Nilesh, we are a 3-month-old company. So we've started 2 batches last month. We've not completed any batch yet for me to give you those numbers. But yes, what I can definitely say is that that is exactly the focus for us, to ensure that there are learning outcomes happening for these learners by the end of the program. And for us, this is instructor-led sessions. So for us, 80% instructor-led sessions, which means that we ensure that we keep the learner engaged through the journey of the program, so that they're able to not only complete the program, but come out with the kind of learning outcomes which will make them industry ready. Right? Because what we realized was that this is one of the biggest challenges, very rightly put, by you. This is one of the biggest challenges that the industry is facing today. Because especially when you have self-paced learning programs, the completion rates are as low as 5%. In kind of some of the players in the market. And hence, we are trying to solve it by creating an engaging experience which has a lot of synchronous learning, and also using technology, using an engaging platform to ensure that people are hooked. There's gamification, there are hands-on learning experience, instructor-led sessions, all of that happening, so that we ensure that we have like almost at 100% completion rate. That's what we are targeting for ourselves.
Got it.
I think for us, this number is close to 95%. And so the reason we are able to maintain this is the regular interventions that we do as and when the learner needs it. We keep evaluating where the learners are, what they're doing, and where they see that there are bottlenecks in their journey. And we involve ourselves to make sure those problems are solved. So they come up and they come out and they're able to spend those times that is required as promised at the start of the program.
Got it. And so, but if I shift to Anmol, what do you see in your business? Do students complete the whole cycle, or how do you measure that, and what's your experience like?
Right. So, Nilesh, what happens exactly right now? We do have a whole academic year program. But when I say retention, there is one point that I wanted to, connect with everybody sitting here, since everybody is from a different segment altogether, more or less a little bit overlapping. Maybe it's a test prep or an upskilling or higher education. When we shifted from offline to online, the biggest challenge for any company would be the consumption of the content that you are proposing, that you are putting forward on the table, right? So therefore, as soon as you come online, still there is a little manual intervention that you always need. Just like I'm sure, like that's what Gunjan said. Putting it all online on a self-consumption mode, it's going to be very less in any sort of business that you see. You are obviously priced of all the different players in the business. Any business sitting here on this table also, wherever there is a manual intervention with the participant of that content, I'm sure the retention will be higher, and therefore, since you know the market, the model of where QMath operates, there is always a live teacher, personalized, sitting in front of a child. It's not a recorded video; it's a live teacher hand-holding that student to complete the syllabus, the academic year content, and therefore the retention rates have been exceptionally well going on for us. And as soon as anybody switches to a self-consumption model, it's going to be going downhill anyway, unless it's an Delta 4 model as per the market standards. But yes, we have got a good retention going on month in this online model as well.
So good. And also, let me bring in Anup. So once somebody goes into a test prep, like how many people survive that test prep period? Like, is it 90% or less or more?
So Nilesh, we need to understand we have 2 segments. One, those students who come from class 10th and they strictly focus for they know their destination, engineering or medical. So the dropout is almost nil because they are high intent people and they know and they complete their course. Maybe it is 1 year course or 2 year course. The second segment, which is from 8th to 10th, where students, they are not really serious for competitive exam, maybe the junior level exam, NTSC, or maybe other Olympiad type of exam, but they are more focused on school board preparation. So there we see a little bit drop, and especially in offline mode, it used to be 3 to 4% or maybe maximum 5 class to class. But in online, where we last year we could see maybe 4-5% more because of some different challenges, because they were not tech ready, device ready, infra support, and moreover now the screen time, that is the biggest problem for the online, that they are engaged with the schools, and especially the smaller kids, where they are more engaged 4 to 5 hours in the school again, and then they are supposed to give some spare time for the coaching classes. So that screen time and the pain felt by the student as well as by the parents, that has maybe increased a couple of percentage, but certainly ultimately students know that we have to, and now they are used to. Now this year the dropout percentage in this section also, it has gone drastically down, but always it is almost more than 90% always, even in the junior section.
Got it. And Digvijay, do you see students coming back like after they go for the vacation?
So I think let me answer a couple of those questions, the prior ones as well. So in terms of one, when students come into our service, we also have a slightly elongated period, right? About 3 to 4 months before the student eventually goes. And for us also, what's been like Gunjan mentioned, or even Deepak mentioned, right, has been around doing a lot of engagement with these students to ensure that they are going through the entire funnel, and we see the entire completion of service, and we also see similar 95% plus sort of service levels, completion levels, and all because of the engagement that we essentially keep doing with these students. And I think that is the most critical part in the business, right? And to your second question, Nilesh, on whether students come back, so it actually depends a lot on geography to geography, right? So I think when I look at geography like Canada, I don't think many students come back, because the intent there is to actually go and settle around there, right? Whereas US, UK, I believe, even though UK has, for example, started giving a post-study work visa, even US, I think beyond a year or two after their education gets completed, I would guess about half the students do end up coming back easily, if not more, right? So yeah, it is a UK had been almost 95% prior to when they started the post-study work visa. So I guess now the students have the benefit of staying back in the UK for another couple of years. So yeah, we'll have to see how students sort of fare if they get really great jobs. UK has seen a Brexit. 1.6 million people have left the country. They need international students to come and run their economy. So maybe they get into plush jobs and they don't come up. So that is that we'll get to know only in a couple of years from now.
Yeah, that'll be good for everybody then, because it meets their objectives of being there, and also some money will inflow to India as a result of it. So
exactly,
good thing for the country as well. Now let me ask each of you, like, what are the 1 or 2 top challenges you see in your respective business at this point, like, or maybe in near future? Like what are those before we conclude. So maybe we can start with Anmol. And then go to Anup. So what are the 1 or 2 top challenges, Anmol, which let's say keep you awake? Just kind of using the phrase. I know not everybody will be having that problem of.
So Nilesh, I think that's a simpler question to ask, but hard to answer, because there are multiple challenges that we have been facing all around while scaling in the different markets. But yes, I will focus on one point, which I'm not sure how far is applicable to other people on the table, is that we have been catering to a set of audience out there in India and they're in international market. But being an Indian company, generating the content that stays longer in India, catering to an audience which is local of that market. See, for that matter, I think Anup has a local business here which runs in India, right? But moreover, as soon as you start growing your business outside India and different countries, the easiest lowest hanging fruit is the NRIs living there, which is the easiest way to approach and start and kick off that market. But as soon as you open up your gates for the native people living there in that particular market, that's when the real challenge is, because you need to understand the culture, understand the need behind that particular market, and crack that. And that's what takes the expertise of that particular area, and which is what I think is more or less a challenge in the K-12 section, I would say, where the client is there out there, and you just have no idea what to look for. Because in India, in India, it's very clear. I was just looking at some study, and that they say that there is a 150 million addressable edtech market, including all the urban areas, language skills, and affordability and everything. But that more or less is a bigger market. But when you go out, there is no limit. There is limitless opportunity out there. But that's when you crack what actually.
So that's a big challenge. That's a big challenge. Actually, it's a great point. Maybe India can become a good education exporter too, like IT, right? I mean, it's a huge opportunity. If we can crack what you just said as a method, maybe there is I don't know, so hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, hidden in that. And this is our China moment, maybe, right? You never know. They did in manufacturing, we could do in education so that's very good point. So let me, Anup, what are the one or two challenges you see in your business at this point?
See, we had a couple of challenges which are normally addressed over the period of 2 years, but now still from the student perspective, internet speed, that is something where the online tutoring, that is something still is a challenge at the remote places. Because if I talk about test prep, students come from villages also. Now, because of the uncertainty of opening the centers, lockdown, you have to bank on the internet. So you may buy a device, or we can also control many things where we can help. But internet speed is something where we are facing little challenge, because every sector, all the these services are not available, and especially in the tier 3, 4 and villages, this is only the challenge. Rest all are mostly addressed.
Okay, so that will probably Airtel will address next year with satellite internet.
Yeah, right.
Not Airtel. I mean, there are two other players who may address it. So
we are eagerly waiting for that.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Let me get Gunjan. What keeps you awake? Like, what are the top two you see right now? Because you're a young business, so I know the challenges will be slightly different from others. So what are the one or two you see the most important?
Yeah, Nilesh, of course, we are an early stage company. So for us, the challenges of scaling up are very different. But I think one of the things which kind of keeps most of us awake, is the reason for our existence, which is how do you add value to the learner? How do you really create that learning experience, which will eventually ensure that they become industry ready, right? And so for us, our model is where we are actually a learning company, where we are setting up the entire content development to hiring our own faculty and ensuring that we deliver the entire content ourselves, right?
Okay.
So learning is at the center of everything that we do at HeroWired. So for us, I think the larger challenges and what keeps us awake is also, kind of revolves around learning in terms of building, getting the right content, industry curriculum in place, to hiring top-notch faculty. Our benchmark in terms of content and faculty is very high. So I would say these are the largest two focus areas for us, and yes, also the challenges that we face currently today.
Got it. And Deepak, what do you see similar challenges, or you're thinking, how do I use money which got invested in?
Yeah, so I think I think there are two things that we also are focusing on, is the learning experience and the outcome from the entire 1 year or 2 years that they spend with us, whether they're getting the real outcome from this or not. It's be it a career transition or be it a hike. I mean, both ways, it should be beneficial to the learner.
Got it.
And what Gulshan said, yes, they should be relevant to the industry as well at the same time. So that's how it
Even the growth rates you guys are having, I don't think it is being that big a challenge. But of course, you have to keep monitoring it. If people don't get value, then maybe they will switch. If they're not, because the market is not going anywhere. It's just that they may switch to another player. Looks like market is secularly growing. And Digvijay, what challenges do you see? Because I feel you only see opportunity. So.
So we have very interesting challenges, right? So the more we try and bring technology and transparency into the process, we realize, one of the key challenges is to ensure how can we, if a bank loan can be generated in 5 minutes, You can get a sanction letter. Why can't you get a university offer letter in 5 minutes, right? So, and I think the key bottleneck to that is the kind of digitization being done, and the government is doing it in the form of DigiLocker and getting a lot of those, transcripts and mark sheets online. But I think a larger part of India's, higher education ecosystem, the kind of degrees, mark sheets that are there, even, class 12 boards, state boards, sort of need to come online so that, higher education providers in India or abroad can, do a sort of very quick objective assessment instead of, there's always this doubt, especially from tier 3, tier 4 towns in many cases, wherein what if it's a fraudulent sort of, document. So I think that is one of the things that we are trying to wrap our head around, build in a lot more intelligence there so that we can make it a lot more automated and a much more delightful experience for the user. I think other than that, it's all about it's hidden in opportunity, about saying how can we grow on to other sort of big international student supply countries, right? Be it Japan or be it China, Indonesia, Thailand, and the likes. Again, every market is very, very different in the way students are assessed by universities. So yeah, bringing a lot of that entire assessment, automating it not just across India but globally. I think that is something that is keeping us awake at the moment.
But that's actually not only it looks like an opportunity to me. Of course, opportunities are always hidden in challenges. So certainly a very well said. We are just towards the end of the session. There are a few questions there. I'll just maybe say those and we'll see who best can answer. Are there any learnings from? It's a question from Sharad. Are there any learnings from the markets with higher tech adoption like China, US, etc., on how EdTech will evolve in the coming years in India and its implication on startups? I'm not sure who wants to take a shot at it. Anmol, you.
Exactly. I think it's quite relevant to the K-12 section of the market, right? So, of course, see, one thing just after me when Anup said that what the challenge that he sees is the internet speed or the logistic issue from the client side is something that I'm very clear that that's never an option. That's never a problem in the international market when you go to US, UK, Canada. So basically, the bigger learning. So there is a lot of optimization in the terms of marketing and the acquisition flow that we have to do in India, and every day it's improving because as soon as you go deeper into the penetrate deeper into the market, you have to customize your product according to their availability, their logistical issues, right? But here outside, it's an open market. You don't have to worry about if the person will have a laptop or a good internet connection, and that's what I think we can consider as a basic necessity living in a US market, right? So, moreover, evolving in coming years, basically, focusing on learning outcomes and one very, very important thing, I'm not sure if everybody will relate to it, but in K-12 section, worrying about marks is something that was a major learning outcome back before COVID, because the schools used to run the engine, right? That's the machine that we all came out through. But now with this in this online world, every parent has understood that marks are not going to get you anywhere, and then the learning outcome is something which really has standardized in an international and an Indian market, and that's what the culture, just like in Western culture that we're adopting, in the learnings and the education also, we will still starting to adopt a culture where we are worrying more about the outcomes and the learnings and the skill set that we possess rather than the marks.
Got it. I think a very valid point. Here we have another question from Shailesh, which says, what are the possibilities for a white label market in EdTech? I mean to say, if someone supplies customized content, courses in complete client branding, would a tech company or a small school would be interested in buying outsourced? Like, is that, I believe that's already happens, but I'm not sure if there is a new take on this. Deepak, Gunjan, but I think Gunjan, you clarified that you are going to do all in-house, so that's out of the, so you're not going to do that. Deepak, is that a thing you all do in your business, or it is all
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
The question is there a white label market for in EdTech, meaning people build content for you and give it to your students under your brand name? I'm not sure if it works in your system.
So how we do it, our content is a mix of recordings from the university professors plus industry experts or some in-house faculties that we have. So that's a blend that we have in
Okay.
our learning experience. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's not a fully relevant question.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
one, and this is around the engagement we talked about from Andrew. With remote learning, how do we measure the student engagement with numbers linked to funding globally? Measuring engagement is key, and I would be delighted to learn how important this is and how it's being measured. Is it number of is it like you see how many times a student is logging in? Is it like what videos they've watched? Like what are you guys doing? Like what's the standard, and who is doing better on that?
Nilesh, I guess here in an online mode, I think this is much easier. When PMAT had been running an offline model for the first 6 years, it was very, very hard for us to track if the child has actually attended or has actually consumed a particular chapter's content. But in an online model, I think it's very, very evidently easy for us to track if the child has actually got what we were trying to convey to them. And one important part is how do you measure the student engagement? Is again not by the completion of a worksheet. It's actually by the outcome of the questions that they answer. Is not, as I relate to the last point, that it's not related to what the concept that they have done. If they actually can relate to the real world application of that particular thing, that I think specifically connects to the K-12 market, because usually the concepts are very abstract to a child and not very connected to the real world.
Just to add, Nilesh, to this point only, when we talk about test prep, all three benchmarks are there, even in online or offline. It remains same. One is attendance, second is engagement, and third is evaluation. So when we are talking about engaging the student or maybe attendance, so every stage we have all the benchmarks parameters set. So absolutely there is no problem to engage or maybe to monitor, and that is the benchmark already set. So maybe less than 90% of attendance and engagement is an alarm to the faculty, and immediately the doubt classes, the calling. So there is a process
Behind that.
so that is not at all a problem.
Any views, Deepak, Gunjan, from you on measuring the student engagement?
Yeah, so for us, it's, like Anup also mentioned, it's a combination of engagement and outcomes, right?
Okay.
Now, engagement could be how long you're either attending the sessions or how long you're accessing, content, how many sessions, how many tests you're doing, for example, on the platform. So that is basically your engagement on the platform and the sessions. But the real measure in my mind is the learning outcomes. So, for example, what we do is we measure how skill development happens across various skills, and which is linked to evaluation. Which means you will evaluate and you will say, okay, has my learner actually learned what I taught them during this period? So while spending time on the platform is one piece, but the real measure is the outcome that you're bringing in terms of the skill development for them. And is there measuring the transformation which is happening or not?
And on top of this, I mean, there are live projects and simulations that you also do on top of this to make sure that the outcome is actually practically implemented, even in a technological scenario.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, evaluation is when actually learning finally happens, because whatever you've learned, you're now trying to apply that and come to a place. So I'll just close with one last question. Sorry, Gunjan, you had a point?
No, I'm done.
There's just one point which I think is that I think probably this is an entrepreneur asking this question. He's saying, Vishwa, a lot of edtech, especially for young ages, are cropping up every day. How are they going to survive, and how many of them are going to survive? I don't know the answer. I'll have to talk to. I'll have to hear from you guys on this count.
I mean, whoever serves the need well, I mean, that's the team which will survive. It's as simple as that.
But will there be many? Like, will it be 1, 2, 5? Like, what type of market it will be?
So you see, just to address this question, certainly in any industry, in any segment, there will be a lot of people coming in. The survival is only for the understanding the need and delivering the USPs. Create your USPs. So now what is happening, simply copying things in a different way will not work. You need to deliver in a different way and create your USPs, which really is appealing to the customer, that will survive. And that is how many edtechs and many of the companies are surviving. They are delivering against the competition. It's not new. Any business is surviving within competition. Certainly in edtech, there are more people coming in with small variations in the delivery model, or maybe small differences, but only the company will survive with a real need addressing of the customer.
Okay. Any other take on it?
So, to me, I think it's a combination of consolidation and specialization, which is going to coexist, right? So there is going to be consolidation. Definitely, NetTech already started happening, where you will have, the larger 5-6 players who will kind of coexist. And then there will be this, there will be a specialization. So somebody, let's say, who's specializing in a particular domain, or somebody who's specializing in a particular, kind of service, they will also coexist, I think, along with the larger 5-6 players. But I think what is going to be common for any edtech player to survive is what we also spoke earlier about, is actually retention. Because acquiring a customer is a short-term problem, but ensuring that your lifetime value you get out of the customer, and ensuring that you create value for them and you retain them, will eventually, I feel, result in who's eventually going to be successful and who's not.
So you are saying there will be 5 to 6 large players. I got one big answer. So that's good. Well, I think we are towards the end of the session. I really, there are more questions, but I think in the interest of everybody's time, I will close. And I really thank Anmol, Anup, Digvijay, Gunjan, Deepak for finding a valuable time to join the session. I hope you also enjoyed it. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I think our practice session was even better. But it was good. It was good to see you all. Thank you so much for your time. And I would, whenever we do a next event like this, I hope you will be supportive, and we'll probably pick another topic that day and dig deeper into that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nilesh.
Thank you, Nilesh. Thanks, Nilesh.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.